I never thought it would come to this. Not in the way it did. My name is Adrian. I'm 38, and I've been married to Fiona for nearly 12 years. On paper, we had it all. Jobs, a house in the suburbs, 2 kids, a dog, the kind of life everyone tells you to work for. But the thing about life is, even when everything looks perfect from the outside, the inside can be quietly crumbling, and nobody warns you about that. Nobody tells you what it feels like when the love you once counted on slowly fades, replaced with distance you can't touch. It started small, almost imperceptibly. Fiona was always busy, but I thought that was normal. Meetings at work, book club, staying in touch with her friends. I reminded myself that she needed space, that everyone has their own life, that I was being controlling for even noticing. I didn't mention it. I smiled. I kept my patience. But the little things started to accumulate. The texts that went unanswered, the missed dinners, the casual shrug when I tried to hold her hand in the living room. At first, I chalked it up to stress. I told myself she was exhausted, that I understood. I thought love was supposed to be patient. Then came the nights that made me pause. The nights when I'd look at her across the table or sitting on the couch, and she would avoid my eyes. Not angrily, not cruelly, just like I wasn't there at all. I remember one evening distinctly. The smell of dinner still on her plate, the soft hum of the dishwasher in the background, and I asked, "Fiona, how was your day?" She glanced at me, shrugged, and said, "Fine," before picking up her phone. That shrug, that single word, hit me harder than anything before. It wasn't just indifference, it was an absence. And I realized then that absence could be heavier than any argument. I tried to bridge the gap. I bought flowers, wrote little notes, tried to plan weekend trips, dinners, movie nights. I reminded myself that love is work, that effort matters. And yet, each effort seemed to vanish into thin air. She'd smile politely, thank me, and then continue scrolling on her phone. Physical touch became mechanical. Conversations were shallow. Every small act of affection I offered was met with a polite dismissal, not anger, but a cold neutrality that slowly chipped at me. I started to feel like a ghost in my own house, a spectator to a life I had built with someone who had stopped wanting me there. It wasn't dramatic. There were no fights, no shouting, no tears. That's what made it harder. The slow erosion, the quiet, the invisible weight. I began to notice a pattern. Every attempt to connect ended with the same response: distance. Every gesture of love, every effort to maintain intimacy was met with polite indifference. And the more I tried, the more I realized I was exhausting myself for someone who had stopped showing up. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to give up. I loved her, I really did. But I had to admit, for the first time, that my love alone wasn't enough. It never had been. I spent nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining conversations I couldn't have, wondering if I was missing some sign, some clue that would bring her back to me emotionally. But there were no clues. Just a slow, methodical withdrawal that had been happening for months, maybe years, without me noticing until it was too late. That's when I started talking to Dr. Emerson. She's my therapist, been working with me for a few years. And when I laid it all out, my exhaustion, my longing, my guilt, my fear, she said something I didn't expect. "Adrian, you can't fight this by yourself. Sometimes, stepping back is the only way to see clearly." At first, I felt defensive. Step back? From my marriage? Wasn't that failure? But as she explained, she framed it differently. A break isn't surrender. It's strategy. It's clarity. It's permission to breathe and to observe, to let the dust settle and see what's left. So, I made a decision. Not rash, not impulsive. I told Fiona that I needed space, that I was taking a 2-week break. She looked surprised, but she didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply nodded, like she had been waiting for this moment without realizing it herself. I booked a flight to Edinburgh, just me, my bag, and a quiet apartment near the river. No drama, no confrontation, just a pause, just space. The first day was surreal. The plane touched down in Scotland, and I felt an unfamiliar lightness in my chest, a quiet freedom I hadn't realized I was craving. I wandered the cobbled streets, past old bookstores and coffee shops, the smell of rain in the air, the sound of the city alive yet distant. I allowed myself to think about Fiona without anger, without plotting or strategizing. I let myself feel the absence without letting it hurt. And in that absence, something shifted. clarity, perspective, peace. During these 2 weeks, I kept a journal. I wrote every thought, every emotion, every fear and frustration. I reflected on my marriage not to judge, not to blame, but to understand. To understand what had been lost, what had been gained, and what I could no longer ignore. I realized I had been carrying the weight of unreciprocated love for far too long, and that carrying it alone was not strength. It was self-destruction. By the end of the first week, I had made a list. Not a list of complaints, but a list of truths. Truths I could no longer deny. I deserved respect, affection, attention. My presence should be valued, not tolerated. And most importantly, I had to decide whether staying in a marriage that had quietly drained me was an act of loyalty or an act of cowardice. On the 10th day, I got a message from Fiona. Just a short text, almost casual. Hope you're finding what you need. I read it and felt nothing. Not relief, not guilt, not anger. Just clarity. I realized I had already found what I needed. The space to breathe, the silence to think, the calm to know my own worth. And that's what this break is for. Not revenge, not punishment, not proving a point. It's for me. For the first time in years, I am seeing myself clearly, without the filter of someone else's indifference. And when I return, I will have a choice. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but out of understanding. And that choice will define the next chapter of my life. I don't know what will happen after these 2 weeks. Maybe we'll reconnect. Maybe we won't. But for the first time, I feel equipped to face that outcome without fear, without despair, without losing myself in the process. And that, I realize, is worth more than any argument, any apology, any quiet neglect that came before. Because sometimes stepping away is the only way to truly see what you were missing and to realize, maybe, that the most important person you need to come back to is yourself.